Hello there. In this video I'm going to show you an example of a retry aspect created using DIVEX and Composition Language 1, and you can try this example in the browser using this URL, and I will be including this link in the description box of this video. So a retry aspect is basically creating retry logic once and then applying that multiple times. And let me show you. And to remind you, Composition Language 1 is based on C#, and if you know C#, then you will understand most of the code here. So here we have a retry method. This is a generic method. It has a generic type parameter called tResult. It has two parameters, an action parameter of type func_tResult and an integer parameter called maxRuns. And this method returns tResult. So what this method does, it loops at most maxRuns times, right? At each time it attempts to execute the action parameter. If that is successful, it returns the result. But if there's an error, then the loop continues, right? Now this condition here just ends the loop after maxRuns times, right? And here I'm just doing some logging. Here I'm writing attempting run number and then the run number before executing the action, and then after the action is executed successfully I log that to the console, and then if the run fails I also log that to the console. So in C# you can use this retry method normally as long as you pass functions here that exactly match this signature. So if there's any function that takes no parameters and returns anything in C#, you can use it here, right? But if you have a function that takes, let's say, two strings and then returns an integer, you can't really use it here directly, right? So now let me show you these two functions. I have a function called calculate. It takes two integers and it returns one integer, which is the sum of these two integers, right? But then to mimic exception throwing, here I'm using this state field to make this method throw exceptions the first two times, right? So the first two times we call this calculate method, it's going to throw exceptions. The third time and the fourth and so on, it will not throw an exception, right? The same thing here is true with this calculate void returning method. It throws an exception only the first time, right? The difference between this method and this method is that this method doesn't return anything, it returns void, right? So everything you have seen so far is basic C# code. So in this main method, I'm using the retry function here, and I'm partially applying this function to fix the value of the maxRuns parameter, right? So here I'm using plus sign to indicate that I want partially apply this value by type. So what will happen here is that DIVEX will check this parameter and it will see that it cannot apply 3 as a value for this parameter, and then it will try this parameter and it will say, okay, so this is an integer parameter and 3 is integer, so I can use this value for this parameter. Now if we look at the signature of the retry function here, the retry variable, it just takes the action parameter but not the maxRuns parameter because that has been fixed to 3. Now what I'm doing in this line, I'm injecting the calculate function which takes two integers and returns an integer. I'm injecting that into the retry function, right? And this still works because DIVEX allows you to inject functions into each other even if they don't exactly match the signature, right? So the action parameter of retry, this parameter here, it takes no parameters, right? And it returns tResult. But calculate here, it takes two parameters and returns int, right? So what will happen if we look at the signature of the resulting function here? These two parameters of calculate, they will bubble up to the resulting function, right? And also because calculate returns an integer, DIVEX infers that tResult is now integer, right? So now here we have a function that takes two integers and returns an integer, right? And this is basically why I call the retry method an aspect. because it allows us to take a function that has a certain signature and it produces a function that has the exact same signature. And this is an important thing for an aspect to have, otherwise we can't call it an aspect. And here I'm calling this function, which is calculate with retries. Now here I'm doing the exact same thing but with the calculate void returning method, right? And to remind you, this function, it takes int a and int b and it returns nothing, right? But this still works because in DIVEX and Composition Language 1, void can be used as a value for t result, right? So this is why if I look at the resulting function, it takes int a and int b and it returns void basically. So now if I run the code, here it's trying to run the first function, it fails the first time. In the second run it fails also, because the calculate function fails the first 2 times. The third time is successful, right? And this is the result of the call to the calculate function. Now here we try to run the second function, it fails the first time. The second time it's successful, right? And this is the result of the second function. So in this video I have demonstrated how aspects can be created with DIVEX, and aspects don't have any special treatments in DIVEX, right? They work because of the normal rules of DIVEX. In later videos I might go through other examples of aspects. Thank you for watching.